Hello and welcome. You're watching Macros with Mythili, where we take a hard look at all the contemporary macroeconomic issues and developments in the country. Well, it's now almost a month since the Mars orbiter mission was successfully inserted into that planet's orbit, and almost a year since it lifted off on its voyage to Mars in November last. The overwhelming sense is one of achievement, bordering on euphoria. But in keeping with ET Now's penchant to assess everything in cold numbers, we'd like to look at the mission from a hard-nosed economic perspective. Even if one accepts that one can't measure such missions in numbers alone, the question is, how best can a country like India maximize the gains from what many would regard as a vainglorious effort? To discuss this, I am joined by an eminent panel of experts. Dr. Sanjaya, Director Geoeconomics and Strategy at the International Institute of Strategic Studies, Dr. Kiran Karnik, who's had a 20-year innings with ISRO and is now Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Indraprastha Institute of Information Technology, Delhi, and Dr. VP Sandlas, former Head Research and Development at the DRDO. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Sanjay, so as the only economist on this panel of experts, I'd like to ask you, what do you think is the opportunity cost of the Mars mission, or indeed of any such interplanetary mission? Would that money have been better spent on schools, hospitals and so on?
Well, you know, Mythili, this is a question that has been asked in India for the last 60 years. When we began our nuclear program in the 50s, the same question was posed, whether India ought to have a nuclear program when it has so many millions who live in poverty. I think the problem for India is that it is a country which at the one end has highly skilled, highly talented people, and at the other end has lots of problems like millions living without toilets. And the art of public policy in a country like India would have to be to deal with the aspirations of both ends of the spectrum of our community. After all, hundreds and thousands of Indians have left this country in search of better employment because they were not able to get the opportunities that they get in developed countries back in India. If we offer the same kind of scientific and technological capabilities and opportunities to many of our young engineers and scientists and doctors, they would have an incentive to return. But apart from that, I think what is extremely important for people to understand that any investment in science and technology is investment in overall economic development. I think often it is not appreciated that science and technology is part of the development process. I mean, the development of science and technology is part of the development process. All the investment we made in the nuclear program, for example, has contributed to strengthening India's energy independence, which will today, in an era when we are worried about climate change and thermal energy, the environmental cost of thermal energy, contribute to building the energy security of the country.
Kiran, would you agree with Sanjay that you need to take care of the aspirational ends of people at both ends of the spectrum, the scientists as well as the very poor? And in any case, you cannot measure the benefits from science in concrete money terms all the time.
I agree with him, Mythili, but I think that's part of the answer. There is a broader aspect to the answer and there are different dimensions to it. One dimension in the space program in particular is that it has been very focused on application of space technology right from the beginning. So if you look at what it has achieved, it's communication, television, reach out to remote areas and interconnecting the cities, remote sensing where you're able to get a lot of data and images which have helped in concrete ways, whether it's assessment of agricultural crops or drought or finding water, a whole host of areas, and of course meteorology. I mean, every time you talk of cyclones, they're being tracked from some satellite in space. And one is proud that these are mostly Indian satellites that are providing us this data. So there's some concrete economic return. And then there's the other part which Sanjay mentioned too, which is the long-term return that comes from investment in science and technology. The return is not visible here and now. You don't even know sometimes if there's a return. But as we have seen over the centuries, an investment in science and technology does pay off in the long term and pays off in huge amounts. It's not just a small incremental part. So there are different facets to it. The part that Sanjay mentioned also in terms of meeting the aspirations, providing challenges to educated, highly educated people are certainly part of that. But I think the first two parts, which is immediate concrete economic returns and longer term returns in a concrete specific economic basis, are terribly important because the Indian space program is one which is unique in this aspect, that it has focused on this. Unlike other programs of other countries which have started either for prestige or have come out of the military, this has been a civilian program focused on saying how can we use this technology for concrete benefits in India. So I think there's a lot of economic gain. Then there are other dimensions of spin-off which we'll talk of later.
Okay, Dr. Sandlas, what Kiran was saying is that there are tremendous benefits are there in terms of economic benefits itself. But we are living in the 21st century knowledge economy where knowledge is shared. There are really no boundaries. So how important is it for India to kind of develop its own technology? Can we not borrow from the rest of the world?
Actually, the space program in India have not basically started with borrowing from other. In fact, as Dr. Sarabhai said, they leapfrogged from wherever they were in those days, whether in world market or world scene or Indian scene, and went straight to some kind of application orientation, where we were sure that there will be some return, economic, social and other returns. Now, talking about the present context, I agree with Kiran Karnik. I am glad nobody is talking in terms of using this as expenditure on science. It is being talked as investment in science, like investment in education, and yes, it is true, there are long-term benefit attached to that. But I think even if there are some people, like he gave a hint, that you cannot be sure whether science will always produce positive results and usable results. But I think the education by itself, doing science by itself, encouraging young people to take up science, and tying it up with the glamour which the Department of Space offers, unlike the rest of the science in the country. No, these are the things which will positively improve to science education, science knowledge, science basics. And every year if you start plotting the curve, the rate of increase of knowledge coming out of science is increasing. So at no stage we have had a feeling that science is not beneficial. Knowledge is not knowledge is always beneficial. So I have a feeling it is not only the long term invested, even in shorter term, especially in relation to the Department of Space, if we encourage the young people to take up science, they will get the benefit, and the country and the rest of the world also is likely to get some benefits out of it.
Sanjay, you also spoke about how investment in science is investment in development, and something that Dr. Sandlas also agreed with, but not directly. He said it's, you have to make science popular, you have to make it glamorous, etc., etc. But given the state of our economy at the moment, is it a bit of a luxury for us to spend money on so much, technology and interplanetary missions, etc.? Could that money, as I come back to my same question, what are the benefits really of spending that kind of money?
Well, first of all, I don't think it is true that our entire space program is 100% indigenous. We have borrowed from other countries. But the fact is that other countries will only give us the technology that they are willing to give, not the technology that often that we need, because after all, technology is a strategic asset. So even as we buy technology from other countries, even as we access existing technology and information from other countries, we need to build our own capabilities. Plus, we need to build these capabilities so that tomorrow, for any reason, if another provider is not willing to sell that technology, we would have the ability to generate that technology. I remember in 1998, after the nuclear tests, when the United States imposed sanctions on India, a scientist from DRDO said to me, I hope these sanctions last at least for 2 years, because I have been trying to develop a technology which it was till now cheaper to import, but thanks to these sanctions, domestic production has now become useful, productive for me, and I want to develop this technology in the next 2 years, and I hope the Americans do not lift the sanctions. So you can see that there are domestic capabilities that we can build, even when you can get it off the shelf.
Well, we'll ask Dr. Sandlas whether he was a DRDO scientist that Sanjay is referring to, but I'm afraid right now we have to slip into a very short break, but please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're looking at the Mars mission from a purely economic eye. Dr. Sandlas, before the break, Sanjay was just talking about how scientists in DRDO were hoping that the sanctions continued, because only then would we be able to develop our indigenous technology. How important is it? Does it not go back to like self-sufficiency and those ideas that we thought we'd given up with the reform process? Now is the time when we're globalized, we can look abroad, we can look for technology elsewhere. How important is it to have self-sufficient indigenous technology?
No, in these days, self-sufficiency in high-tech areas, I think it is a very, very difficult question to answer. We have to depend globally on the most cost-effective suppliers. Now, when we talk about technology, I think what he perhaps meant, I don't know which scientist talked to him, that sanctions were for us to procure components from outside, not technology. Technology anyway we never got really in high-tech areas, whether in space or in DRDO or for that matter atomic energy. Yes, people went, they attended conferences, they talked to friends, they learned little bit, that is true. But per se, if anywhere one can define that we got technology, so-called technology, conventionally technology where we can produce things, I think it has only derailed us rather than improved our situations. So I think the question of self-sufficiency, I think it's not very important. It is a question of how effectively we can make use of our own knowledge, the rest of the world knowledge which is available in the open literature, and make things which are better than others. You see, space, my first 20 years were in space, so my learning is primarily from there, like Karnik. You know, in space and also in DRDO missile programs and all, we have not been shy of using the latest technologies, new technologies, unproven technologies. While in other countries, their commercial mindedness is much higher. So they have always depended on technology which was proven elsewhere on the ground. So I feel having gone into proven technologies, they are spending more money. We willing to take little risk with newer technologies, which I think in some way they are, if not cheaper, they are more cost effective. We can make things in a smaller amount of money. This is the positive point I think in our country, especially in the Department of Space, in the missile programs and in atomic energy, which I feel very strongly about.
Kiran, would you agree with that assessment that it is our ability to do jugaad in a positive way, not in a negative sense of cutting corners? Is that the reason why we were able to do it so much more cost effectively?
Yeah, I want to add to that and answer your question, Mythili. One is, I'm a bit wary of using the term jugaad because unfortunately it has come to mean improvisation with make-do stuff. Whereas what has happened in the space program in particular is that we are not using some sort of low, simple technology. It's very complex, high technology which has been developed here, as Dr. Sandlas just mentioned. The difference has been that we have created it, and I think we have spent a lot of time and effort in understanding the designs, in simulating, in doing offline tests so as to try and minimize the risk of failure. But that has enabled us to do things cheaper, and therefore we are today in a certain category of launch vehicles, but probably the cheapest in the world. And as you might know, the Canadians are now asking us to do a launch of their satellite, for which they were going to Russia. Of course, because of the Ukraine situation, we might benefit, but we might be politically hesitant. That's a different story. But they've come to us for a launch, and it's some 450 crores for a launch of one of their satellites. And just a few months ago, we launched 4 satellites for different countries. So this is now becoming commercially, in cash terms, not just economic terms, viable as a possible program. It will take some time to build up, but already is there, apart from what we are doing in India. So this technology is now finding a market. But to your question on this, yes, we are developing technologies, and to your earlier comment and Sanjay's comment, yes, I do know a technologist to mention to me that technology denied is technology developed. But that's a bit extreme, except in certain critical areas, because everybody in the world, and again I go back to what Dr. Sandlas said, everybody in the world today depends on global supply chains. So you get what you can, but what you can't get or what is critical or strategic, you develop, especially for a big country like India. But it's not as if you're trying to do self-sufficiency where 100% is done here. You can't. There are pros and cons, and you've got to trade off, do what you can and do it. But as he said, the systems have been designed and developed here. And what I'm proud of, as I mentioned in the beginning, is that in India, these systems have been developed for our applications. They have not been designed for a missile to go somewhere and then convert it to a launch vehicle and then say, what kind of satellite can I put on top? We have said, what is the application we want? Therefore, what kind of satellite do we want? Therefore, what kind of launch vehicle do we want to be able to carry that satellite? And then the design has flowed from that. So applications have paced technology in many ways. This is the Bhabha-Sarabhai model in both atomic energy and space, where applications have said what they want, and technologists have been given the challenge of saying, can you develop this? And they've done it.
Okay, so they've delivered. Dr. Sandlas, I think ISRO also had a commercial arm, Antriksh. So is there a commercial possibility? Can we cash in on all this money that we have spent? Can we get some dividend in economic terms?
No, we are getting some benefit cost related, and we are able to sell launches, and other satellites are going. We are selling imageries outside, which are also, in fact, Indian remote sensing satellite system today, I don't remember, I think there are 12 or 13 satellites been active. Perhaps we are the most cost effective and the largest remote sensing satellite imagery making and selling in the world today as on today. So, we are quite self-sufficient in this for meeting our needs. I think as Karnik said, I can reframe that word self-sufficiency to mean self-sufficient to meet our own needs in our own way. Okay. And if we can make use of that to help others or to sell to others, I think it is a very positive thing, and Antriksh is doing a very good thing in that direction.
I'm afraid it's time for us to slip into another short break, but please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're discussing the economic fallout, pluses and minuses of the Mars mission. Sanjay, before the break, Dr. Sandlas was talking about all the positives from the mission. But what, to your mind, are the spin-offs from something like the Mars mission?
Our space program has had enormous spin-off. Don't forget, we are a continent-sized country. And for a continent-sized country, telecommunication through the satellite has been an extremely important boon for us. And today, that technology has improved the ability of doctors to reach out, modern medicine into far-flung areas, the ability of the government to communicate during a crisis, whether it's a tsunami or an earthquake. In other words, communication is one important strategic asset that has been developed because of satellite technology, because of the space program. But there are many other, today India is a naval power. We are building, blue sea naval capabilities. We want to have the ability to have a navy that can provide security for the transportation of Indian oil as well as goods all the way from the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea. And the only means of communication, if you have that kind of a blue water navy, is through satellite technology. So the space program has had both strategic benefits as well as pure economic benefits.
Kiran, would you agree with that? Because Sanjay spoke about communications being a big positive spin-off, but I would have thought it is the internet which really revolutionized communication, and that came from the US, and it's really available all over the world. So would you agree with Sanjay that our indigenous satellite abilities is what made the huge difference for communications?
Two aspects to that, Mythili. First, of course, I understand what Sanjay said in the way he meant it, but first of all, I don't like his term spin-off for communication. That's a core part of the program. To your question, yeah, the internet, but to get the internet out to people, how do you reach the people, whether in cities or particularly in rural areas? You need some way of getting to them. We don't have enough optical fiber laid yet. It's being done now. But 40 years back, when we needed to take education and help to rural India, we used a satellite. And in 1975, this was the first and biggest ever experiment in using satellites for what today we call DTH. This was 1975, taking education to rural remote areas. And as Sanjay mentioned, you can do the same with healthcare. And the very same with internet. If you have to reach those people and make internet accessible to them, yes, you could do it on optical fiber. You could do it on wireless if there's enough mobile and towers, but the bandwidth will be low. Or you can do it by satellite, where you can get high bandwidth and get connectivity to remote areas. So you use a combination of these and optimize these different means. That's the communication part on land, and he mentioned sea, which is very important out in the oceans. Then, as I mentioned earlier, there's meteorology, there's broadcasting, there are a whole host of newer applications that are coming up, from remote sensing, navigation. The latest satellite to be launched hopefully in the next 1 week, it will be a navigation satellite being launched by ISRO, which will help navigation of both planes and ships. And we are setting up our own navigation system. So these are core part of the ISRO program. The spin-offs that you mentioned comes from the materials that are developed from this, from the electronics that are developed from this, which are going now into other places, into other industries and other uses. And Dr. Sandlas can tell you that DRDO, surprisingly, or not so surprisingly in the Indian context, did a great job of taking some of these and using them for healthcare. And a great job has been done on how these technologies have been spun off into other areas for health services.
Dr. Sandlas, Sanjay also talked about how defense being a sector being a big beneficiary. But now that you allowed 49% foreign direct investment in defense, will not a lot of this technology come to us by way of foreign investment?
I have, to be frank, not gone very deep into this benefits and the future of foreign direct investment into indigenous technology in defense or in space or atomic energy. I haven't gone into that, but I think I want to touch the spin-off related to which I think sometimes we tend to forget. Yes, it is very clear and everybody knows, and Kiran has mentioned, Sanjay has mentioned, communications and healthcare he mentioned. But I want to mention the spin-offs of missions like Mars mission and Chandrayaan mission, which are purely science related missions. So there is certain higher level of motivation in that, if I may use the word, to do things, even that esoteric type of things, reliably, with quality, and with a fixed time frame, as a team effort, with a lot of confidence. This is what is motivating, I think, the young scientists within space or defense or atomic energy. And I think if it gives some examples, sets up certain goals for the rest of the country also, that within India, despite all the negative factors, infrastructure and whatever you have, things can be done as long as we do things which are worthy of being done.
Okay. So the sense of achievement, the sense that we can do it, is that important, Kiran, for itself, or is it because there are some really concrete positive spin-offs which maybe you cannot really calculate in the short term, but they are definitely there? Would you define space research as the ultimate public good?
I think it's the second to me, Maitri. The first one may be important in some very broad sense as being prestige, national pride and so on, but I'm a bit wary of those. And I'll tell you why I'm wary in the space context, and you didn't ask this question. The Mars mission, Chandrayaan are great because I think they've done a lot. But as we move towards thinking of a manned mission, 30 years from now, very good. 20 years from now, maybe. 15 years from now, possibly. But doing it in the next 2 or 3 years, frankly, I don't think it's in the range of affordability or necessity for the country in terms of a return on so far what the space program is concentrated on. When we invest money, we get something out of it. And I'm not so sure a manned program is going to give me that. So let me say that in difference to many other friends from space who are very enthusiastic about it, it has tremendous benefits and spin-offs, but given the costs, uncertainty and risk, I would be wary of that. Though from the first part of what you asked, national pride, giving us a sense of self-confidence, saying we are up there, it has its value, and I'm not minimizing that. But personally, from the early days of the space program, and everything was quantified, we were worried about costs. Where can you save 1 rupee? How can you optimize this? How can you get a better return? For me, man in space, given risks, costs and benefits, are not yet quite there. It's a blue skies thing. Some years from now we might afford it. Today, question mark.
Okay, so 20, 30 years from now, we might be able to think of manned missions, but as of now, unmanned missions make sense. As far as manned missions are concerned, the jury is still out. So I'm afraid on that note, we'll have to come to the end of this program. Thank you so much, Kiran, as well as Dr. Sandlas, also Sanjaya, for joining us. Thank you also for watching, but we'll be back next week, same time, with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.